Hi, this is the talk on the low-high index of pupillary activity for CHI 2020. It's work by myself and my friends Krzysztof, Krejtz, Nina, Gehrer, Tanya, Bafna, and Bækgaard. Krzysztof is in Poland, Nina is in Germany, Tanya and Per are in Denmark. We have funding from the US National Science Foundation, for my part, Bækgaard funded for Denmark, and Polskie Ministerstwo Nauki I Szkolnictwa Wyższego in Poland. All right, so the paper is on eye tracking measurement of cognitive load using the wavelet transform and looking at the transient and phasic and tonic signals of the pupil diameter oscillation. So here we've got some applications where this could be used. Automotive learning domains. This is a paper in 2016 at CHI. Also, Pejsakovic did a PhD dissertation using the low frequency, high frequency ratio of pupil diameter in his study, and some of our algorithmic development is based on that work. That was in Toulouse, France in 2016. And also another example is Friedman et al. 2018, also a CHI paper of cognitive load during driving, among other examples, which you can look in the paper for more. I will skip most of this just to mention the cognitive load theory originated by Sweller in '88, which highlighted the use and reliance on short-term memory, and which is why oftentimes cognitive load is measured using task difficulty tasks that use some aspect of memory, such as NBAC. Oftentimes, eye tracking papers also mention Hess and Polt, 1964, referring back to that work on pupil diameter. However, it is very important to mention that in that work, they used a specialized pupillometer, an Ariflex 16 millimeter, which measured at 2 frames per second, which is very different from today's eye trackers, which measure at a higher rate and are usually much farther away from the pupil, and the eye is usually allowed to move. There is also something called the task-evoked pupillary dilation or pupillary response to EPR that is often mentioned, and it's important to note here, as per the graph in the original paper, that pupil diameter is often measured in relation to a baseline measurement. So usually what happens is there's a task where there's nothing happening, and that's the baseline, and then a task of increased difficulty is given. Pupil diameter is measured there, averaged, and then the difference is taken between that measurement and the average during baseline. Pejsakovic in his study linked pupil diameter to the LCNE system, where he basically said that the pupil diameter in response to task difficulty is the phasic response, whereas the baseline measurement is linked to the tonic response. And one thing he also mentioned is that what if you take the measurement of the pupil under low light conditions? Well, in that case, the pupil diameter is already dilated, and there's a danger there of missing the response to cognitive load with pupil dilation as the expected response. So it's important to note that for future studies. So Pejsakovic did a basic study on a Toulouse NBAC task. I won't spend too much time on this because there are time constraints for this talk. The point being, though, is that his ratio showed an inverse relationship to cognitive load. In other words, the LF-HF ratio should be lower with an increased load. That's important to remember for later. And his response showed distinction between this task difficulty. One thing to note about his task, though, is that the signal was taken over the entire duration of the measurement, whereas what we do in the pupil diameter and the wavelet transform can be measured potentially in much shorter increments, perhaps even in real time. All right, so a lot of our work is based on our 2018 paper at CHI, where we introduced the IPA, which was Index of Pupillary Activity, based on Sandra Marshall's Index of Cognitive Activity, something that she patented. But in her version of the ICA, there is only the wavelet coefficient decomposition mentioned, and she does not mention the scaling function. And because it is patented, details of her implementation are difficult to find outside of the patent itself. So in 2018, we discussed how that works, and we presented our own version of the ICA called the IPA. And so here, similar to Sandra Marcel's, we have the wavelet decomposition, the psi function, but we also talked about the scaling function, and both of them are used in combination to give you the wavelet transform, which is important to note is a multi-resolution analysis of the signal. The J superscript there indicates which level of decomposition you want to look for the changes in the signal. So here is the discrete version, and here's the wavelet filtering. Essentially, G there is the convolution of the filter. You see in the table at left, if we look down across the coefficients, you see 1 and -1, and so it's a difference between successive pairs of numbers. Meanwhile, the scaling function uses the H filter, which is an averaging filter. You see the coefficients there, 1 and 1 divided by √2, both of them. So you have a sum. It's a sum of products. So you take a first value is multiplied by 1/√2, the second value is 1/√2, add them together and divide, and you get an average signal. Other filters can be used, of course. WX4 is a popular one. We end up using the Simlet 16 wavelet. The longer the filter is, the smoother the effect is of the scaling function. Here's an example of what you get in 2D. And so you have those same filters, but applied over the rows, in which case you get a difference and you get the vertical edges, as you see in quadrant 2 in the image at right. Or if you take the filters and apply them per column, you will get horizontal edges, as you see in quadrant, I believe it would be 1, 2, 3, third quadrant, bottom left. Meanwhile, the scaling function gives you a subsampled version of the signal, which is at the upper left quadrant 3. And if you now take the next level of the resolution, then we have the next level coefficients. And so you can see that what we're getting is high frequency content at the original base of the pyramid, and then we get lower frequency edges as we go up the pyramid in the decomposition. In 1D, the idea is similar, except of course it applies to the 1D signal, which is essentially what the pupil diameter is. It's just a line. So in practice, we use the Simlet 16 wavelet to get a slightly smoother signal, and what we did beyond Sandra Marcel's ICA is look at the edges or the changes in moment-to-moment oscillation of the pupil diameter, and that is accomplished by looking at the neighbors to the particular value that we're interested in, and if those neighbors are greater than or equal, the central value is greater than or equal to the neighbors, and it is strictly greater than one of them, then we have an edge in the signal. That's what we find to threshold the moment-to-moment oscillation of the pupil diameter. 2018 paper had the code for this, which is still readily available, of course. In 2020, we updated that with the low frequency, high frequency ratio. And essentially what it is just taking the low frequency component, dividing it by the high frequency component. So the high frequency component is at the bottom of the pyramid, and you take something like in the middle as the low frequency component, and then obtain the LF-HF ratio from within the wavelet decomposition, which is, I think, new. I haven't seen anybody else do this. As I said, pasted copies of this over the entire course of the signal. Here we're doing it within the wavelet domain. So that's our key technical innovation on the paper. All right, to validate, we applied the LHIPA, as it's called, the LHIPA, to the same study that we did in 2018, which is a replication of SIGCHI et al. And there it was number counting, so you either count backward by 17, the difficult task, or count forward by 2, the easy task. And you can see the paper for the results that we obtained 2 years ago. The study was shown to be indeed indicative of the difficulty of the task, so accuracy of responses were lower at high difficulty, and it was also subjectively found to be annoying. You can refer to that paper to get more details. So the IPA then and now responded directly to the difficulty of the task. Here, the LHIPA, as expected, is showing the inverse relationship. So the greater the difficulty, the lower the LHIPA value. And so this is what we see. neither can distinguish between easy and controlled tasks. However, that's not that necessarily a bad result, because in a sense, not much is happening cognitively in the easy task. And so the distinction between those two and the control, where nothing's happening, is not so dire. All right, so really the innovations beyond the technical innovations, our paper introduces two additional tasks. In 2018, somebody in the audience said, well, did you use NBAC? And I said, no, because we had to replicate Siegenthaler et al. So here for 2020, we did do an NBAC task following the Apple et al. Paper at ETRA 2018. It's a Tübingen group, which did a 1-back and 2-back, or at least that's what we asked them, how they did theirs, and we asked for their guidance in how do we do the NBAC task here. And so we tried the 4-back task in a pilot study, but found that remembering back 4 steps back actually led to participants guessing in the pilot study. And so we got results that were no different from random. So we ended up with 1-back as the easy task, which you just remember the letter before, and 2-back, you remember 2 letters before. And so this was Nina's contribution as design of the experiment following the Apple group. We used a limited alphabet, C, F, H, I think, and maybe S. You've referred back to the paper to see how we designed this task, again, as a replication of Apple et al.'s ETRA paper. One problem we had in this setup is that, unfortunately, I used low lighting condition, and I guess I'd forgotten about Pixakovich's warning that if you have the pupil already dilated, it might cause problems in finding pupil difference related to that difference to the original baseline if you have low lighting condition. Nevertheless, we did do the 1-back and 2-back tasks here, counterbalanced, and LHIPA showed, as expected, a good response, whereas the task was distinguished from baseline. The IPA, on the other hand, responded contrary to expectations. In fact, it decreased with task difficulty, which is not good. One other thing that we did here was we varied the gaze point to 5 different locations of the screen to control for that, whereas the original IPA in 2018 used a fixed gaze task where people looked only in the center of the screen. So here we were controlling for the apparent appearance of the pupil off axis, which will be an ellipse when it's off axis to the camera in the eye tracker. And that had no effect, so that's a good thing. Here in experiment 3 was our applied setting, where people were performing an eye typing task. Again, 2 difficulty levels measured by the LIX readability score. They had to remember a phrase and then type it back in an eye typing kind of application, as shown here. If the LIX was less than 30, was the easy task. Greater than 60 was a difficult task. Here you can see the letter T highlighted in red, which is what the user is fixating to type the letter T. And in this case, once again, LHIPA showed results that were consistent with the other experiments. In other words, LHIPA is inversely proportional to task difficulty, which is a good thing. IPA, once again, gave us results contrary to expectations. One thing to note here, eye gaze is free to move as the person is typing. And so this is a very good, robust result of the LHIPA in this particular example. So that's it. We've had 3 experiments. It looks like we have pretty good, robust results for LHIPA. The IPA, on the other hand, only used 1 wavelet coefficient band. It did not take into account the tonic-phasic ratio as the LHIPA does, and that is probably the reason why LHIPA is responding better in these 3 tasks, whereas the IPA only responded well in the original fixed gaze task. So it looks like it has pretty good potential for being a robust measure of cognitive load, as well as for potential real-time use. Thank you very much. Because it's a limited kind of or virtual conference, I suppose the best way I can entertain questions might be through email, and I'll be happy to do so. I'm happy to share the code in Python if you like as well. I'm eager to see how LHIPA would work in your experiments. So if you are interested in this, please do let me know, and I look forward to getting in touch. Thank you very much.